Arsenal stumble against Manchester City once again, but they've got bigger fish to fry and the treble is still on. I'm Joshua Hall. Welcome to the Full Arsenal. I'm joined by Simon Collings and Charlie Wyett, as always. A disappointing day. Manchester City are the Carabao Cup champions. Charlie, I'll start with you. What went wrong for Arsenal?
Hugely disappointing, really bright start, wasn't it? And after that, it all went wrong. Even at half-time, I mean, Arsenal were the better team in the first half, but they can have absolutely no complaints. Didn't hurt Manchester City by any amount what we'd expect. Lots of poor individual performances, of course. Brilliant management from Pep Guardiola, sort of suffocated the midfield. And yes, City deserved to win. Ultimately, I think any Arsenal fan watching this today, if they're off to Islington Town Hall for the open top bus parade to watch the league title, maybe a Champions League, maybe FA Cup as well, they're not going to care about yesterday. But it will hurt because, you know, we were waiting for this first cup rather, for 6 years. And I think the majority of people thought Arsenal would do it. I think the Arsenal players certainly did. So, yeah, a big disappointment. But they've got a few days now to stew on it and think about it and come back, even stronger.
Come back stronger, exactly. I guess there's obviously the big thing that we'll get on to, Simon, in a second, in the Kepa mistakes and how that changes the game. But I think it's worth talking about just that second half in general. Manchester City were just far better, weren't they? They just seemed to play them off the park.
Yeah, and I think if you were an Arsenal fan leaving Wembley in that massive queue for the tube station, you'd have been sat there, or stood there rather, thinking he didn't really throw any punches. Like, that was the thing. I didn't feel like Arsenal went out on their shield and some sort of blaze of glory. You know, they were just really, really passive. And it was summed up for me by the midfield of Rodri and Bernardo Silva. I think Bossing, Rice and Zubimendi, who both looked shattered. And I feel like we've said that multiple times when we've been on here. Look like they're in need of rest. Obviously, Rice is going to get it this week with England. Zubimendi hopefully won't play too much for Spain. But yeah, it was a weird sort of throwback to games where you used to watch Man City absolutely dominate Arsenal. And I thought we'd kind of moved past that for Arsenal ever since, a few years ago they beat them in the Community Shield, that complex around City and the dominance around them had gone. But you watch that and it was like watching the games of old where City just, have Arsenal in complete control and were dominant and deserved to win.
I got a stat here, in fact, about that. City have, but in their last 5 League Cup meetings against Arsenal, which has happened quite a bit in different rounds over the years, City have beaten Arsenal by an aggregate of 13-1. So it felt like those old games. It felt like Arsenal were this inferior team to Manchester City in that second half. I don't think it felt that way in the first half. It felt a bit more balanced. Yeah. And I think, you say Arsenal didn't really throw any punches. They had an early jab, didn't they? They had that moment where Havertz goes through and James Trafford makes that incredible treble save. But it just felt in that second half like Arsenal, they were back in their shell. They were that team that used to play Manchester City and almost go into it thinking, well, it's Man City, we've not got a chance.
Can I ask you two guys a question? What do you think of the criticism of Zubimendi? Because I've looked online today. I know online's not always a good indicator of what normal people are thinking. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But I think a lot of Arsenal fans were probably leaving there, as you've just said, disappointed at the lack of control in midfield. But Zubimendi's getting a lot of stick. Is it fair?
I think it's harsh, personally.
Yeah.
I think if you look back at his sort of the amount of minutes he's played this season, he more than anyone has been kind of run into the ground almost. He's played a lot of minutes. Arteta's not really trusted Christian Norgaard. I think Mikel Merino being out injured has hindered him as well. I think he could have played deep alongside Rice, particularly when now they've got these two midfielders. And I feel like Zubimendi has become a bit of a lightning rod for criticism. Admittedly, yes, he's not been great, but I feel like everyone's just kind of forgotten that for the first 4 or 5 months,
he's one of the best players, isn't he?
He's playing absolutely brilliantly, like adding goals to his game, running the midfield. So I do feel for him, and I think he was a victim. I know we're going to come on to sort of Kepa and stuff, but I think he was a victim of Arsenal not being able to play out from the back, which is one of Raya's biggest strengths, and then almost going long, comes back at him, and him and Rice were just in the middle there with the ball going over the top of them, and we're just completely out of the game.
What do you think?
I think there's certainly a place for some criticism of his performances recently. I agree with you at the start of the season he was brilliant, but he has seemed a bit anonymous at times. I mean, Kepa made more passes than Martin Zubimendi yesterday, which is when you're signing a player who's supposed to be the one that's knitting together those two lines, the one that's supposed to be the heart of that midfield, especially, when he came in, that was supposed to be his role. Rice was supposed to be going forward, scoring more goals. You've got to have more onus on him to take a game like that. And look, let's get into it straight away, right, about this backline, because I feel like we have to have this conversation when we're talking about Zubimendi. Manchester City stopped pressing. They put a bank of four, didn't they? We couldn't believe it. We were all looking at each other in the press box at one point like, he could have the ball all day. He had the ball for over 30 seconds at one point, Kepa. They weren't pressing. And what that meant was that Zubimendi was sort of sat behind this bank of four players, not able to impact the game. And I understand that Mikel Arteta likes his players to have to be in certain positions and they have certain roles. But as a professional footballer, at some point, you've got to say, look, we're not getting anything from here. I'm going to drop in. I'm going to grab the ball. I'm going to take this moment and do it myself. And he didn't do that. I agree as a whole, maybe he shouldn't be getting a lot of criticism and he has been a bit of a scapegoat recently, but this wasn't his best performance by any stretch for me. I
wonder what Norgaard's done. I mean, look, he sees Norgaard in training, doesn't he? We don't. And, we could always talk about lots of manager decisions at any club, with England as well. Arteta sees what's going on every day, the work rate, how he's fitting in. But when I've seen Norgaard, and obviously there's one game he's even playing in defence, or a couple of games, he's done all right. Don't you think he's been a bit unfortunate not to get a bit more of a run out, having, arrived for 10 million? And do you think he might want to leave in the summer?
I think he's got less minutes than everyone would have expected, really. And probably he would have expected. I know he was quite open when we spoke to him. I think it was before the Carabao Cup game in the Champions League. He kind of knew his role coming in. But I do wonder for him where he looks at it and thinks, I've gone from being Brentford captain, playing a lot of minutes, to completely other end of the scale. He's going to be a year in his contract in the summer. There is an option on it, but I do wonder for both sides whether they think, you've kind of served your purpose.
Yeah. There's no way that he thought he was going to play this few minutes, because he's just not playing at all. And quite often he's the spare man. Sometimes he's not even in the squad. And at times...
That must hurt.
The Everton game, and all in retrospect, you can say that Arteta made the right decision because Max Dowman came off the bench and had that impact. But at the Everton game, 16-year-old Max Dowman was chosen on the bench over Christian Norgaard. He was the spare man. And that... I know he's a professional, but that has got to hurt. Look, we can't avoid the elephant in the room any longer. Let's talk about Kepa. Let's talk about how he completely changed this game. We'll get onto the mistake, but for me, the whole dynamic of the game changed when he misjudged that sort of header or whatever it was he was trying to do, and then had to scramble back and make a foul, picked up that yellow card, and then momentum just completely switched with Man City. I mean, how big of a moment was that in the game?
Yeah, I think the big thing that you get with Raya, isn't it, is composure, confidence, and almost the aura he sort of sends out. And I think when that period where Arsenal had to weather the storm for 10, 15 minutes, which they didn't do, I look through that and think, those mistakes don't happen with Raya. He's brilliant at claiming crosses, is probably one of his best things he does, and he's brilliant at playing out from the back. And he's actually brilliant at playing long from the back. When they had Ramsdale there and they brought Raya in, one of the key things that they looked at was, yes, Ramsdale was good playing short, but over 40 yards, which is sort of metric you look at it, Raya was way better than Ramsdale.
I'll just ask you on that, because do you think that's why Guardiola has implemented that tactic in terms of not pressing the goalkeeper, right? Because he knows that Kepa isn't going to be able to play the long ball that Raya would. And Raya isn't afraid to go long, is he? So has he done that thinking, look, Kepa, not only is he not as comfortable on the ball as Raya for sure, but he's not going to be able to play those long passes. So Arsenal lose another avenue by just not pressing him at all.
And you saw that in the second half, didn't you? Where it was basically, I was sat next to Charlie and I was saying the ball's just coming straight back here. It was like when you watch sometimes a Sunday League game and they hoof it long up the pitch and the striker can't get hold of it and they just come back again. And it was just waves of attack and it was building from that. And for me, I'd said in the games before leading up to this, I think you just have to play your number one goalkeeper. I know Arteta spoke afterwards, said it'd been unfair to Kepa. He's got us to the final, but Arsenal have waited 6 years to be in this position. It's not like Manchester City where Pep's picking up his 5th Carabao Cup. They haven't had this before. And I just think you can't get to that moment and be, right, we're going to just play Kepa because he deserves to do it. And I found it odd because I thought I would describe Arteta as ruthless, and I thought that was a very unruthless and almost an emotional decision to make from him to play Kepa.
It's an incredible record. I mean, I can't remember last time a player to have featured in any cup final, but he's had a negative impacts in 3 EFL Cup finals. That's a fair effort. In 2019, refused to be subbed for penalties with Maurizio Sarri, and then 2022 missed the deciding penalty against Liverpool, and then this one yesterday. I mean, it obviously wasn't all his fault yesterday.
No,
but he's still played a part, hasn't he? In quite a big cock up. I agree, Simon. I think he's made. I understand Arteta's decision. Be really interesting what he does for Southampton now on Saturday week. He shouldn't play Kepa, but I think he probably will.
Yeah, that's a conversation, isn't it? I think if there was any other game after that, if it was a Premier League game and Raya could come straight back in, we wouldn't even be thinking about it. And then you'd probably, if you had Southampton a couple of weeks down the line, you'd say, yeah, you know what, throw Raya back in. But for it to be straight off the back of this, he's got a really big decision to make, Arteta, for that Southampton game in the FA Cup, because you're sort of leaning back into that, let me boost his confidence the same way as the decision he made for this, and that hasn't worked out. But it would feel ruthless is the word to cut him for a game against Southampton where you would feel like he would be comfortable enough. I mean, I don't know. Do you think he'll play?
I think Kepa will play. I agree with Charlie. I mean, I would have been ruthless. Actually, the second leg of the semi-final was where I thought Raya would come in, because I didn't think Kepa was great at Stamford Bridge, and I thought then that Arteta would be ruthless and did it. And the thing is, he has been in the past, like back in the days when Leno was still there with Ramsdale. Leno had the Carabao Cup games, and they got to the semis with Liverpool, and Arteta just went, no, you're out, Leno. And that was, Leno didn't play again and left in the summer. Like, it got to that point. So it was just a very un-Arteta move to do that, to be so emotionally invested in making that decision. And I kind of feel like now, I think when you've backed him for that final, I think you'll back him again to play at Southampton. But that is a huge game now, because I know they've got this break now where it kind of stops the spiral happening. But if you go to Southampton, who are in a good run of form in the championships, 8 o'clock, it's going to be a difficult time to play, kick off, under the lights. Suddenly it spirals, and if Kepa again, all eyes are going to be on Kepa now in that game. If he starts, he is going to be the story one way or the other.
I wonder whether this break is a positive thing or whether it's a negative thing. There's two ways to look at it, right? It's either going to be a nice way for them to sort of reset and refresh, and they can sort of get rid of a bit of the pressure off the back of this, or they have to stew with this. They have to stew with this feeling of losing, and it could be a negative thing.
So we were talking about that, weren't we? Sort of the game, and I think we're probably both agreeing that it is a good thing that they're all going to go off, or most of them. Obviously, there's injury issues as well, which maybe we'll come on to in a bit. But the players are going to go off with their countries, forget about the game, have a different environment. Have a different coach, different training sessions, clear their minds. And again, come back whenever Thursday week and then prepare for a cup game. So I think it's been a good thing, rather than say that I had a Sporting Lisbon this week.
Yeah.
That would not have come at a good time for them.
So other than sort of that mental side of it and sitting on it on those 2 weeks, what sort of mental impact can this have on the title race, right? Like, obviously they're 9 points clear and you feel like they're still strong favourites to win this trophy, but we'd spoken a lot in the build-up to it, when this Carabao Cup final comes along, this could tilt, the scales either way, and it's gone in Manchester City's favour. It's going to be a boost for them, obviously, but could this now impact the title race? Do Arsenal feel like they can't get over the line, sort of things? And not only just that, but the injuries, as you're talking about, is that going to impact the title race? Jurriën Timber's out, Eze is out, William Saliba has had to pull out of the France squad with injury. Arsenal are losing important players at the crucial time of the season.
The interesting thing was Pep after the game, because he got asked that direct question, how does this impact? It was actually the last question of the press conference. How does this impact the title race? And I thought he was going to lay it on thick and be like, lay down the corner, we're coming for them, we're chasing. And he actually went for the opposite. And maybe that was a bit of mind games. He sort of said, I'd love to be
Pep Guardiola playing mind games.
I'd love to be 9 clear, Arsenal in that position. It's almost saying it's sort of theirs to lose. But I do look at that table and think, 7 games to go, admittedly City game in hand, Arsenal go there. I think that is a lead that I feel this is difficult to shift the momentum when the gap is that big. But what it does do is, in much as it gives City momentum, I think for Arsenal, suddenly goes into Southampton, which would have been this great game after you won the Cup and, you're flying high. Now suddenly becomes a really big game. And conversely, so does the Sporting Lisbon game. Because the season when we were talking before, leading up to that Carabao Cup final, was like, oh, this could be historic, an amazing moment. And now suddenly you're feeling like, oh, you're a bit of scrambling to get it back on track. So I think it's increased the pressure on a Southampton game, which, you know, a week ago looked like a lovely fixture and a chance for Arsenal to book another Wembley trip.
I think the result yesterday gives City a psychological edge for April the 19th, but equally puts them under a lot of pressure. Because I think when Arsenal come back in the league, it's Bournemouth at home. But so for City, Chelsea away. Don't win that. Let's say Arsenal beat Bournemouth at home.
Arsenal play first.
They play first on the Saturday. The game's on the Sunday, Chelsea. If they don't win at Chelsea, the title is over. So it doesn't matter what happens on April the 19th at the Etihad. The title is over if Arsenal beat Bournemouth on the Saturday and Man City don't win at Chelsea. So it's a sort of a double-edged sword. You know, City, it will help them yesterday, but equally, if they mess things up at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea could obviously do Arsenal a huge favour. At the moment, you look
Don't see Chelsea doing that, do you?
Are you going to put any money on them? You know, but so you know, City still have a hell of a lot of work to do. It has helped them yesterday. And you know that was as good as we've seen City play in the second half.
Yeah,
and that was as bad as we've seen Arsenal play in the second half.
I want to talk about the pressure of it in terms of like that side of things, where Arsenal, that was as bad as we've seen them play for a while, and it was in that second half where the pressure starts ramping up more. That's when the players are looking and they're thinking, right, 45 minutes to win a trophy. We're playing against a Manchester City team that have got the better of us however many times. And it was another individual error that made a mistake. Arsenal now, as this season is going over and they're getting closer, are making more and more individual errors. I've got a stat here, right? Between August and December, there was one error in 28 matches that led to a goal in an Arsenal game. But since January, they have made 7 individual errors in 22 games that have led to goals. So Arsenal's players are making sloppy, silly mistakes. And it feels to me, as someone who's been watching Arsenal my whole life, so familiar. It feels like the teams that couldn't do it, that didn't have the mental edge, that they felt fragile. And in those moments, it's so familiar. And I worry that there could be a spiral here.
I feel like we're in a counselling session for you. You're in a safe space.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of those mistakes do come with the pressure of the situation. No, I don't think it's a surprise that the dates you give are when crunch time comes. Yeah. But also, I look at fatigue and the element of that, and rotation and playing players. And it was a point Charlie made in his piece in today's paper about, you know, Arteta needing to kind of not go away from what's got them in terms of rotating the players, keeping the players fresh. And I do think some of those mistakes come from, you know, look back to the one at Zubimendi against Manchester United. Again, we talk about players playing lots of minutes. Their mistakes come from people who are playing a lot. And we talk about this big squad, you know, £250 million spent. This is when you should see the value of it, when it's absolute crunch time and you're fighting in 3 competitions. So I think part of that is also an element of mental fatigue, but physical fatigue. And I think that's something Arteta needs to get right over the next bit.
And Zubimendi and Rice are the 2 worries, aren't they? Yeah. Jurriën Timber was a worry because of the amount he's played. And, you know, he having been, I think, Arsenal's best player in the first half of the season. He's dropped off, carrying injury, is withdrawn from the Dutch squad. Ebere Eze obviously hasn't been played that much. It's a shame that now he's just starting to play well. He's going to be out for at least 2 weeks. So he's not going to play against Southampton. He's a huge doubt for the away game at Sporting Lisbon, probably Bournemouth as well. So, you know, they've been unlucky with some of the injuries. Some of them have been sort of brought upon themselves, or really by Arteta, by overplaying. So he's definitely improved the rotating, hasn't he? But not totally got it right. Definitely needs Norgaard. Let's hope. And what we mustn't forget, of course, you've got Norgaard, Calafiori, and Victor Gyökeres. They'll obviously be disappointed by that final defeat yesterday, but they're about to have arguably the biggest week of their careers, because they're all involved in World Cup playoffs. And in 10 days' time, Mikel Arteta could have 3 players who are literally right up there with their confidence on an absolute high, or 3 players who are utterly devastated. So that will have an impact in his team selection. You know, he'll obviously be hoping that Gyökeres is obviously Sweden incredibly lucky to be in the World Cup playoff for how rubbish they were, you know, in the qualifiers. But Gyökeres could be 10 feet tall, having, you know, fired Sweden into the World Cup, which would help Arsenal. It really would.
Arteta speaks a lot about that kind of I remember with Moreno earlier this season where he had a great game for Spain and scored a few goals. And he literally played him at the weekend. He was like basically like different team, but he's just flying at the moment, and emotionally feels great. And that's prime example of Gyökeres goes away, fires Sweden to the World Cup. He'll be saying, "Start me at Southampton. I'm on fire."
Right, it's being a bit doom and gloom.
That was me bringing positivity.
No, I liked it, but what I want to talk about is the fact that there are still 3 tournaments that Arsenal are favourites to win. I mean, I know they're still favourite for the Premier League. They're favourites for the Champions League. Obviously, Manchester City and Liverpool face each other in the League Cup, and they'll eventually have to face one of those if they get past Southampton and go beyond that. But they're still on for an incredible season.
Yeah, look, if you ask Arteta, it's an obvious thing to say. If you ask Arteta at the start of the season, any Arsenal fan at the start of the season, you're going to get to March, you're going to get to the Carabao Cup final, play a bit crap, be in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, quarterfinals of the FA Cup, way ahead of Manchester City.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind the disappointment in the previous seasons, I'm pretty sure every Arsenal fan would settle for that, wouldn't they? They really would. Of course they would.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at the moment, you're looking at the Champions League. Are they going to win the Premier League and the Champions League? Probably not, but they've got a chance. Yeah. It's incredibly exciting. They're in a great position still. So let's hope they can park that defeat yesterday and move on. And it still could be, one of the best seasons in the club's history.
That's probably why the break is good, because you go away as an Arsenal fan, an Arsenal player, and you get a bit of perspective, and you come back after 10 days away and you think, well, actually, we're all gone for the treble here. You got a chance to go and do something absolutely amazing and just taking out that disappointment. Whereas if you'd gone straight into Wednesday night, Southampton, FA Cup, you almost lose that chance to get a bit of perspective. Whereas now I think you can take a step back and think, okay, yeah, disappointing defeat, played terribly, but there's still so much to go and play for. And for those players, what are 6 weeks to go and attack?
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you both just said that Arsenal are winning the treble, right? And that's exactly what you both just said.
You can clip it up. Put it on
Nothing matters. The Carabao Cup's a Mickey Mouse trophy.
I didn't say that.
It's getting clipped out now. That's exactly what you just said. Well, look, I think that's a good enough place to end things on a positive note for all the Arsenal fans that have felt a little bit miserable after yesterday's result. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll be back next Monday. Don't forget to like and subscribe.